Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Braitch, and this is the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I am an emotional health and leadership coach and co-founder of the not-for-profit Seen and Heard, which supports those seeking healing, connection, and systemic change. My vision is to move myself and the world around me towards connection and compassion. And each week, I will connect with amazing guests who are on their journey to bring about meaningful change in their own lives and the world around them. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I have the great delight today of being joined by Sarah Hamilton. Sarah has been working as a psychotherapist and counsellor since 2011. She co-founded and managed a network of counsellors across London and Reading and established a successful private clinic in Harley Street before moving to the Welsh borders in 2017. She now sees clients in person and at her clinic in Hay-on-the-Wye and also by online video. Sarah has a particular interest in working with older adults and those on the autistic spectrum, but her primary focus is on treating trauma, PTSD, and dissociation. Her experience of working with traumatic survival patterns and the deep personal and relational difficulties that these can cause later in life has led her more recently to undertake specialist training in working with adults who went to boarding school. Sarah also has been involved in a fantastic case study which we will be discussing today. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's lovely to connect, and thank you for your patience in getting a date. And in recent weeks, on the Seen and Heard newsletter, we've shared the case study a couple of times, and it's had a lot of interest, people clicking through, reading it and enjoying it. So we're going to get into that today because it really is a fascinating one about your work with someone who's been to boarding school and your reflections, and also just on their courage for going through the process, but also be willing to share, use their name, etc. on that. So yeah, it's going to be great. But we first connected as you are one of our specialist counsellors and therapists on the directory, on the Seen and Heard directory.
Yeah. So, probably a couple of years ago now.
Yeah, I think you were one of our first, which is lovely because you came from Nick Duffell's brilliant training for therapists and counsellors, The Unmaking of Them, which is a specialist CPD, continuous personal development, sort of module on boarding school syndrome and on working with ex-boarders. And you came through there by Nick. So thank you, Nick, and thank you for being here from the start with us. So let's get into the conversation really, and I always like to understand a little bit more about someone and where they came from into the work that they now do. So yeah, just whatever you're comfortable sharing around your early years. How was life for you growing up?
It's always quite a big question, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would say I had a fairly normal middle class upbringing. I didn't go to boarding school myself. I went to local primary and junior schools, and then an all-girls grammar school for my senior years. I suppose the most notable thing about my childhood was my parents' divorce, which happened when I was about 7. And for various reasons, that was quite traumatic for me. I went through quite a long period of what I would now, as a therapist, identify as dissociation. At the time, I didn't know what it was. It was just life. I was just living through it. I suppose the way that I coped with things after I came out of that dissociated phase was to create a survival personality, which I suppose has certain similarities to what I see in a lot of ex-boarders now. So hyper-rational, very disdainful of emotion, very rejecting of any vulnerability. Yeah, actually quite a lot of internalized misogyny. That I really didn't want to be doing with any of that frippery and female nonsense when I was growing up. I was quite strongly independent, and that really shaped my life for much of my 20s and 30s, I suppose. Uh,
Mm.
it took a long time to begin to untangle uh, all of that.
Mm. Mm. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing about the divorce. So
Mm.
yeah, my heart is with you. I think yeah, my children, I divorced when they were about 3. My parents divorced when I was about 5 or 6.
Mm.
It is a real such a big wrench, and then you've got the kind of the duality, living in 2 houses under 2 sets of rules, under new things. There may be new partners coming in and out. There might be all sorts of things going on, and it really is. Yeah, it really is such an impact. And I hear you on the dissociation, and then the strategic survival personality. So there's this the child puts the unwelcome parts into shadow and dials up the bits that they think are going to get them through, and make them acceptable to caregivers and keep the attachments going, and off they trundle.
Yes.
So, yeah, yeah, it's a real thing, and thank you. So it shaped things as you came through into adulthood. Um, what would you say? What would with this dissociation, with this survival personality? How did that really show up for you in your early adulthood?
Um, I would say mostly in the drive for self-reliance, um, which is, uh, that's a real double-edged sword. It is both a blessing, can be enormously helpful in work environments, in just getting through life in general. And it is also a curse in personal relationships. Um, it really gets in the way um, of intimacy and real connection.
Mm,
So I think a lot of that was true for me at the time. Um, but it suited me for many years. It wasn't until probably my mid 30s that I started questioning um, the way that my life was shaping up, and the I suppose the absence of a sense of depth or meaning or purpose to things.
mm,
Um, and that was what really drove me towards a more internal exploration. It's when I became more interested in psychology. Uh, I'd been working a lot internationally at the time, so kind of intercultural communication and the psychology behind that was also very present for me. And that was when I started my studies and my training eventually to become a therapist.
wonderful, wonderful. So, what sort of work were you doing before you trained? Then, so internationally, what industry, what field?
Yeah, I drifted for a little bit, did various things, but eventually settled. I had a sort of 14-year career in the travel industry.
Right, right, okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. I'm hearing you on the purpose thing. I think often we sort of just fall into life. I think you just fall into life, and it's not until at somewhere in middle age. Most of the clients I work with, a lot of people who come to Seen and Heard, the leadership stuff I do with Peers Cross, Compassionate Leader Pathway. there's people looking for purpose, people looking for a sense. With men, it's around that menopause time where the testosterone drops, and we're moving from a place of pushing out into the world to make our mark, make our name, have families, etc., to moving to a place of service and legacy in the second half of life. It's a real change. And for the women I coach as well, often there's been that real push on the family side of things, and these days to then have the career and the family at the same time, and to juggle, and then at some point the coping strategies, the survival personality, it no longer serves them, and the house of cards starts to sort of come down a bit, often with a very positive outcomes in the end, but a lot of pain whilst it's happening. So yeah, thank you for sharing your path through. So as you started to study, what was the most interesting parts of it? Because I know, when you're studying to be a counsellor and a psychotherapist, you have to do your own work. You have to do your own personal work and therapy along the way. So, without getting into too much personal stuff, what really worked for you as a client, and what did you bring then into your own practice from that?
I mean, I suppose from quite early on, I was very interested in trauma and different ways of approaching the impact of trauma and the aftermath of trauma in people's lives. Both traumatic events, the car crash or the war wounds or whatever, and also developmental trauma, that kind of much longer term, early life tangle of difficulties that builds up, accretes over the years. My core training was very wide-ranging in terms of what it looked at, different approaches to therapy. And one of the things that really struck me early on was looking at the body and the connection between mind and body. And of course, that is incredibly relevant for trauma, because trauma is often held within the body, within the musculature, within the internal organs. So I suppose I've always been curious about those elements of things, and they also formed a part of my own personal work that I was doing as I was trying to kind of loosen and soften the edges of my own survival personality through the course of it all.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, it's so important what you just mentioned there about the body. The body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk's amazing book, and Body Says No, Gabor Mate's. But this, it's pretty much what universally accepted. Now there are a few very well-known trauma specialists who still don't make that link as well as others. But for me, it was the game changer in my own journey. Was I was a floating left brain.
Right, yes.
It's a floating dissociated left brain for 30 years of my life, since childhood, when I had to put parts of myself away for safekeeping, and it was going through somatic work, which is working with the body, the energy systems, as well as talking things through, understanding the inner world, like internal family systems or archetypal psychology, inner world. So starting to find your parts, all those fragmented parts, and then the connections with, when I think about that memory, when I think about delivering a presentation at work, when I think about my drinking, I feel it in my belly, I feel it in my chest, I feel it in my hands. Okay, there's some energy here, there's something to follow.
Yes.
Thank you. And I know that that's going to come up in the case study chat as well, because you use some of those somatic techniques with the client, and really bore fruit. So that's great. Thanks. And so you're moving through qualifications, doing your own work along the way. And then could you just tell us a little bit about your approach as a therapist and counselor? So, because I often get asked, there's so many there's so many names of different types of therapy,
Yeah.
and for a layperson, that's a bit overwhelming. Like, what do they all do? What does it all mean? So, could you just tell me a little bit about your approach, and maybe just to help demystify some of it for people?
Yeah, I think at the last count, there was over 400 types of therapy, named types of therapy that
Good to know
exist in the world. I mean, it's completely bonkers,
that.
actually, the number of different approaches that there are. Um, and, some will focus on thinking styles, some will focus on connections between the past and the present. Some may be more somatically focused. Some may be more interested in dreams. Others may be completely uninterested in those. And I mean, one of the interesting things when we look at the sort of the meta literature that looks at effectiveness of all these different types of therapies is that actually across any given population of people, no one type of therapy is more effective than the other. They all have about the same outcomes. But what is true is that for the individual person, there may be a particular type of therapy that they resonate with. And I think that is really the most important thing to think about. If someone has heard of a particular type of therapy that they think, oh, yeah, that really, I can see that would fit with me, then it's worth seeking out a therapist who works in that modality, who is specialized in that modality. But if there's nothing in particular that speaks to you, then actually the most important thing is to find a therapist who you feel comfortable with, because you're going to be talking about some difficult stuff, some personal stuff, and it's really important to feel comfortable with the person you're on that journey with.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, that's so important, isn't it? They also say the relationship with the therapist is sort of primary determinant of success. If you feel comfortable, because people, particularly with relational trauma, whether it's attachment early years stuff or from damage from relationships over the years, most of trauma is, yes, there are car crashes, yes, there are things like that, but a lot of it is just interpersonal wounds. Things we've been given without our permission along the way, or parts that have got hurt and put away. And so to heal relational trauma, it has to be healed in relationship. And that's perhaps with a therapist or in doing group work with your partner, your spouse, your family. It's a reattachment of parts to yourself, and then a reattachment of you to that outer world, the opposite of dissociation that you spoke about. So yeah, the reintegration parts and relationships, beautiful. But yeah, there's with 400. I didn't know there's 400. That's a lot. But yeah, but I think you're right that using the intuition. So when people come to see in the head and they ask, you've got this directory, how do I know who to work with? And I say it's intuition. So if you look down, you look at photos of people, you read a little bio, maybe hear a little bit about things like, okay, what's EMDR? Okay, what's somatic mean? Get a little bit of knowledge there, but don't go too far down the rabbit hole, and then just use your gut, and then speak to two or three, and your a little voice inside will go, that one is that one, and just listen to your heart, listen to your intuition. And the other thing that comes up a lot is people come and say, oh, I think I'm broken because I've had X, Y, and Z therapy and it's not worked for me. I would always say it's just, if there's 400, my God, you've got a few more to try. So go and have a go at something else.
Yeah, that would be a little bit like saying, I've had half a dozen dates and none of them went well, so I'm never going on a date again. Yeah.
I think that was my dating about 10 years ago. I'd reached that point after my divorce. I was like, no, this is not for me. I'm going to live on
Yeah.
my own in a cave up the mountains. Yeah,
No, I think it can be used for me as a therapist. I mean, I draw on lots of different approaches, and that feels important so that I can try and uh, adjust the way I work to some degree with what feels useful or comfortable for the person in front of me. But I think it's helpful to think of each of these different types of therapy as a different map of the mind. And every map is useful in certain circumstances. But we need to have the right map. You know, if I live on the edge of the Brecon Beacons, and if I want to find my way from one side of the hill to the other, I need an ordnance survey map. I need something that tells me the contours of the land and where are the boggy bits and where are the cliffs that I don't want to fall off. If I'm trying to make my way from one side of London to the other, an ordnance survey map is no use at all. I need an A to Z, you know. And if I'm out in the deep ocean, I need a maritime map. And so it's not that any of these maps are wrong or that one is better than the other, but we need to be able to choose them appropriately.
yeah, what a brilliant analogy. Thank you. I've not heard it put like that, but that's really great. I think I had a lot of talk therapy for 20 years, and then when I had my breakthrough, it was more somatic work. But I don't look back on any of those years of talk therapy and say, well, they didn't work. They were what I needed at the time. They were what I was able to hear at the time. I couldn't, in my 20s and 30s as an alcoholic, workaholic, very shut down, still very lad culture, all that stuff. I couldn't hear, you know, five rhythms dance or somatic experiencing or going and hugging trees in the woods and all the stuff I do now. I couldn't have heard that. I needed to talk. I needed to rationalize it. I needed to make connections with why my behavior was coming up and things like that. So it was very powerful. But later on, I needed to meet the body more. And as we talk into the case study next, I'm really fascinated to hear how you used all those different styles to unpack, with the client, what had happened and help them to heal and reintegrate. So let's move on to that. Could you tell us, so what's the name of the case study?
So I've called it On Finding the Missing Horses, which is, it relates to the very first dream that my client, who asked to be called Joe for the case study, so it relates to Joe's first dream, which really kind of gave shape to the whole of our work together. And dreams were such an important part of my therapy with Joe. They're not always something that comes up with people, but they are always something that I'm interested in if someone is willing to bring them or it feels useful for them. So, yeah.
Thank you. So Joe is the client within the case study, Finding the Missing Horses. Is that right? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And so just give us a bit of context, please, around the case study. So when did it start? How long was it? And, why did you choose to write it up?
Right. So, it's quite unusual to be producing a case study like this and then sending it out into the world. So it was not something that I was planning on at the beginning of my work with Joe. We had quite a brief time together. It was only 14 sessions. And it was right at the end of our very last session that Joe said, so I've been thinking maybe you could write a case study about our work together, which threw me slightly. It's not something anyone has ever suggested before. So the first thing we had to do was arrange another meeting to discuss it further, because it's quite a big thing. And the most important thing was why Joe had requested this. And it felt really important for him to be sharing his experience of the therapy and how it had helped him, in order to help potentially other ex-boarders who had been struggling, who were maybe not sure about seeking therapy, and to some degree also to have something to encourage other therapists to think about boarding school issues. Because sadly, this is not something that comes up on core trainings for therapists still. It's very much a secondary issue. It's out off to one side. Many trainings will never mention it as an issue, even if they're talking a lot about attachment. They won't talk about the breaking of attachment that happens when a child is sent off to boarding school. So really the intention from the beginning was to create something that might inspire other ex-boarders to seek out the right help, and inspire other therapists to seek out the right study and training to work with those clients. So then the question comes, well, how do we write this? If this is Joe's suggestion, is there some way that we can co-create the case study? And that's what we did in the end. And so we've ended up with this quite unusual piece of work, which includes not just my view of the therapy as a therapist, which is what we normally get in a case study, but also Joe's experiences, session by session, what he was thinking, what he felt, how different interventions from me landed with him. And in particular, because the dreams had been such an important part of the process, he wrote up the description of each dream. And so that's in there in the case study as well. So it's quite detailed as a story of the therapy and how it progressed over time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for your work in that, and thank you to Joe as well for their inspiration and courage to kind of get into this. I know Toby Ingham, the psychotherapist, wrote a great book recently, A Guilty Victim. That was, fantastic book. It did a great job with it, and the client in that as well. A lot of so in here there was dreams, there was. We'll come into some of the other aspects of it, but in theirs there was a lot of art, drawing, and collective creativity. And dreams, interesting ones. So let's just do dreams for a minute, because I've got a thing with my girls. Every morning, come down, do breakfast, and I ask, how do you sleep? And they'll always tell me about their dream. And I find it fascinating, because they're in their mid-teens now, and seeing how their dreams are changing, and seeing how those dreams are coming in around kind of judgment and fear of all these things sort of really starting to move in their world at school. And I look at my dreams, and they have for certainly 20 years, largely 9 out of 10 dreams are frustration dreams. There's somewhere I want to be, and I can't get there. And it changes. It could be a holiday. It could be going surfing. It could be seeing my partner, finding my kids. I can't find my kids. I'm always blocked from getting to where I need to be. And I've done quite a lot of personal work on that. And I understand it's about my purpose. I wasn't who I was supposed to be. I'm getting there now. And I have a role to play in this world, which I'm moving towards. And at the point at which I fully understand that, and I'm fully on my path, my dreams will change. is my
Mm.
belief.
Mm.
My subconscious will align behind the mission, if you like. But
Yeah.
at the moment, it's going, oi, you, you need to get on your mission, get on your thing.
Yeah.
So, what's your view of dream work, and how did it come into? Just a little bit more about how it came into this case study.
I mean, I think dreams are fascinating. They're like a little window into that part of the mind which is not being constantly watched and controlled by our conscious thoughts, you know. Um, and and I suppose there are many different ways to approach dreams in therapy. We can think about them as you've just described, kind of expressing unconscious desires or wishes or intentions um, that need to be kind of listened to in a way. Certainly paid attention to, at least observed, acknowledged in some way. Um, we can think about dreams uh, as a form of metaphor. Um, you know, they're talking in pictures. They very rarely have words, and so each of those images is essentially a metaphor for something else. They're not always direct in the way they speak. Um, and so the client is very often the person who can say what the metaphor means for them. There were times in my work with Joe when that was absolutely crucial. There's what he calls his most important dream towards the end of the therapy, where he meets a young woman with a David Bowie Aladdin sane hairstyle. And I mean, there's no way that I, as a therapist, can say, "Oh, yes, well, you know, Aladdin sane hairstyles always mean X, Y, Z." I think I have to ask, what does that mean for you, Joe? What does David Bowie represent in your life? You know, he's the only person who can answer that. Um, and then there is the type of symbol that is more archetypal, more related to something on a broader human level. And Carl Jung was the one who really wrote the most about this kind of way of interpreting dream symbols on that very primal level. What do these symbols mean to the whole of humanity? And that was what came up in Joe's first dream in the case study. He was dreaming about trying to find some missing horses. And that almost immediately, for me, sparked off ideas about, well, what does a horse represent? And through the ages in human history, it's represented power and wildness and aliveness and vitality and kind of a form of abandon, uh, which is particularly interesting when that is contrasted with the very kind of rigid, controlled personality that is cultivated in boarding schools, is encouraged in boarding schools. Um, so, so that one seemed very clear to me, that the archetypal aspect of the horses in Joe's dreams had an important role to play when we were picking it apart and trying to understand it afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. As soon as you started to, you have to have read the case study, but as soon as you started to say horses, it brings something. To me, it just brings the word freedom because I just go wild horses. I just see them running across the
Yeah.
plains, and I just see movement and freedom. But for someone else, it'll be it'll be a different representation.
Yeah.
They might have grown up with horses, and it may be a link to your childhood memory, stability, to
Exactly.
strength, or just loving connection to the horse.
Yes.
But like you say, that I think for a while there, maybe in the 80s, early 90s, there was this thing about like dream interpretation. You'd buy a book and it'd tell you what your dream meant. But what you said there was more powerful, which is it doesn't. I don't believe it necessarily works like that. It's about the person's interpretation of what it meant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you're so right. For a different person, horse, the idea of horse could be something completely different.
Mm.
The archetypal for them might be completely irrelevant.
Mm.
Uh, it would be much more to do with some kind of personal connection with horses in their past.
Mm.
Um, so I think it's always really important, um, when looking at dreams with people, to be kind of open to all of these different possible layers of meaning.
Mm.
And as much as possible, I try to be led by the client
Yeah. Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
Um, and, sometimes a dream can have an immediate and very clear sense of what it means to someone, and other times it can be a total mystery. I worked with someone once. They brought one dream, a very powerful dream, right at the beginning of their therapy, and we worked on that one dream through the entire course of our work together, understanding it in different ways, kind of piecing bits together that we hadn't understood before. And it wasn't until right at the end of our work together that we said, okay, now we feel we really understand that
Mm.
dream from
Mm.
months and months previously.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think the thing about dreams, or I'll come on to next, the somatic work, the body stuff,
Mm.
is ultimately I say to clients, look, we can't think our way out of trouble here.
Yeah.
We have to feel our way out of trouble, if you like.
Mm.
We have to sense and intuit and feel in our bodies out of trouble. Yeah, because particularly ex-boarders, about half my client base are ex-boarders, and universally the thinking part. So in archetypal language, I use king, queen, king or queen, warrior, magician, lover. Some Jung's spin-offs from Jung's original archetypes developed by Moore and Gillette. But the king or the queen is the sovereign is joy. The gateway emotion is joy. The magician, the thinking part, the analytical part, gateway emotion is fear. The warrior, gateway emotion is anger, but they're also the action taker. And then the lover, the connected part, is grief, because grief is often unresolved. Grief is often the biggest barrier to connectivity and things we love, and so I use that framework. But it's just whether it's doing work like that, whether it's work in the body or it's dreams and the subconscious, the unconscious mind, that's where the shifts are going to come. Thinking about it, having great language for what's coming up for you is powerful. But ultimately, when the stuff starts moving, it moves energetically. It moves in the unconscious and the subconscious and other places. It's rare to think your way out of something. Could you just speak to that in your experience and your view, and also what happened with Joe and as things progressed?
Yeah. So I mean, this connection between mind and body is so strong. It's hardwired in our system, in our nervous system, and I think to some degree our whole Western culture is more interested in the neck up, but certainly for ex-boarders, they've come through a whole schooling system which has pretty much minimized the importance of the body and focused on the importance of the logical left brain, rationality. And so I often tell people every emotion that we think we're feeling comes with a physical counterpart. And we can see that in our language, in the way that we talk just generally. You know, I've got butterflies in my stomach before an exam, or, we talk about our heart skipping a beat when we see the one we love, or our knees going weak in fear. So for clients who aren't sure what they're feeling sometimes, it can be helpful then to tune into what the physical sensations are, because that can give us information about what the feelings might be. I worked with someone once who was facing a terribly frustrating situation. They were a very gentle, lovely lady who said she wasn't sure what she was feeling, but when she tuned into her body, what she said was, "Oh, it's funny, I've got like this bubbling sensation coming from my feet upwards. It's like a chemistry experiment." And I said, "Gosh, it's almost like the blood is boiling." And she said, "Yeah, that's exactly it." And from that, we were able to identify that perhaps she was a bit angry, her situation. And she would never have been able to say, "I'm angry." It just wasn't part of her view of herself at that time. But, when you felt your own blood boiling, it's very hard to refute that. um, so, that learning to sense inward to internal bodily sensations, that interoceptive sense, I think is hugely important. It can give richness and detail to emotions that otherwise just have a very generic label, like anxiety. I'm always curious, well, where is this anxiety in the body? How is it different from that other anxiety that you felt the other time? So any time that there's an opportunity to invite somebody to connect with those bodily sensations, or to help them learn to do that, if they are comfortable with that, because not everybody is, but if they're comfortable doing it, then I think it can open up really powerful opportunities for understanding and the knowings of the body, and sometimes the memories of the body, which is what came up in my work with Joe. Each time we tuned into his bodily sensations, there was a memory that came up with it. And that happened once when early on, when he was just thinking quite randomly in a way about how he didn't like the feel of cold dishwater on his hands when he was doing the dishes. And he thought that was kind of silly and, just a very random thing. But actually his body, when he tuned into that, said, no, there's a memory connected with this. And later on in our work, that became a really important thing that we were able to tap into, that when there was a sensation in his body, an agitation in his legs at one point, we were able to tune into that, and another memory came up. And that was a really transformational thing then, because his legs actually felt an impulse to kick, and it brought up a very powerful memory of kicking and screaming against restraining power when he was much younger. And that simply wouldn't have come up if we hadn't been able to look at his interoceptive sense, and if he hadn't been willing to go there, because it takes a bit of courage actually to do that. It's an unfamiliar thing for many people.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really beautifully navigated through that. You bring up a lot of good points. I think the particularly working with ex-boarders and in my experience, the ex-boarder men particularly don't want to go near the body stuff at the beginning. There is a navigation because it's a bit warm, it's a bit fluffy. At school in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there may have anything like that. I mean, I remember being called gay boy and bender for a year and a half at school because I put my hand on someone's shoulder.
Wow.
That's the level of and at the time, that was sort of the worst insult that could possibly be thrown, even though we know obviously that that's not anything like the case, but it certainly was at school. It was back then. So it's remarkable how the physical self is lost in that dissociative process. And mentioned boarding school syndrome, the ABCD, Joy Chavrin, abandonment, bereavement, captivity, dissociation.
Yes.
You have to check out, or as Nick Duffel says, the strategic survival personality. We realise we're not getting out of here, and we're going to have to survive. So how am I going to do it? And the body gets annexed. It's required, for boarding school. It's required for sport, usually. And when I see that the physicality of the sport that was used in boarding school, something like rugby, for instance, we played incredibly hard and it was brutal for the reason that most of the people playing weren't in connection with their body.
Right.
We could put our bodies through anything. And that's that Spartan training regime of sort of breaking the child to make the man or make the woman. And ultimately, having a lot of emotional range, having a deep connection with your physical sensations, not required on the battlefield, not required in the empire, or not, not required to be of service to your family or whatever the dynamic was. So, thank you. This agitation, those legs kicking to emerge. So, really, really helpful for anyone listening around. The body keeps the score, but the body also has the signpost to heal you. You just have to listen, give space to listen and ask the right questions. So thank you. Something that came up within the case study that is really powerful is shame. And, often describe shame as like a paywall, in sort of modern terms. If you're a paywall for a newspaper or a media, a website or something, it's a paywall to get to the emotions behind it. It's sort of, or a memory behind it. It sort of sits up and it makes everything opaque and you can't really get through it until you've looked at and dealt with the shame. So, Joe's shames that sort of came out around porn, self-punishment, internal judgment. I looked at all those three and went, yeah, ticked them off my own list in my life. So could you tell us about shame and working with shame?
It's a really difficult one, actually. Shame is such a tender place, and simply the fact of talking to another person about what feels shameful can feel almost impossibly difficult. So I think it's something that has to be generally addressed very gradually. I think it takes an enormous amount of courage to actually voice the shameful things to another person. And the irony is, of course, that the antidote to shame is light and air. If we can find the right person to speak to about what is shameful, then the shame tends to just burn off in the sunlight. But getting to that point, crossing that threshold, is incredibly hard. And I think it's also worth differentiating. So shame about particular things, which is often culturally influenced or relationally influenced, and shame about just existing as a person. And actually, that sort of existential shame can be a trauma response. So there are times in developmental trauma when it would actually have been dangerous in a particular relationship to act shamelessly. That would have perhaps invited further abuse. And so at that point, the shame itself becomes a protective instinct. It's something that kicks in to encourage us to be small, to hunker down, to be quiet, to be as small and invisible as possible. And that can be a really hard one to untangle as well. It's a slow process.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've heard in these podcasts and then the other sort of reading and work, the amount that shame comes up when we talk boarding school, trauma, boarding school syndrome, people who've been to boarding school who are unpacking their stuff. Shame was universally used as a control mechanism. It was hard baked into the school.
Yeah.
And particularly so, often when we focus on the boys, male experience at school, a lot naturally often drifts back to the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, etc. When I interview female ex-boarders, 90% of the time comes back to shame. We were shamed every step of the way when we didn't conform to whatever the school was trying to mold us into, or whatever the sort of peer attachments, the peer groups were trying to mold us into. So it's just shame based all the way through. And so then the inner critic, the part of us that is trying to keep us safe, if you like, keep us out of trouble. I call it a safety officer. That part will often use shame as well. If you behave in this way, we will experience shame. Shame will feel horrible. So we just don't go there. Like you say, you keep your head down, stay in your lane. Absolutely stay in your lane. So knowing that shame was used not just in boarding schools, but in institutions worldwide, we all know about the links between the Catholic Church, Catholic schooling system, and shame and guilt, Catholic guilt. It was used very overtly as a mechanism within the educational system. And I think, it's very powerful. And therefore, as you say, one of the hardest things to start to move and talk about. And in my personal journey with it was only when I said out loud for the first time to my therapist the things I was deeply ashamed of, I gave them light. They started to burn away. I then went to a group and I said them in front of a few more people, and they didn't run away from me, and they didn't hate me, and they didn't abandon me. So it burned off a little more. And then I say it on a podcast, or I say it to hundreds of people at a presentation now about my porn addiction, about the stuff I used to watch when I was watching porn, or about my alcoholism, or the way I treated my children, or it's just once it's out, safely out, and you've done it in the right way with the right container at the start, eased your way into it with a professional or a therapist or someone you really trust. The more it opens out, then it just opens out for others to come in and speak their truth, their shame to, and just get it out. So thank you. So with you did the unmaking of them training. That's how we originally met. I
Yeah.
went to the beginning with Nick Duffel, which trains therapists, counsellors, people in the helping profession around boarding school syndrome.
Mm.
What came up in the case study with ex-boarder Joe and your other work with ex-boarders? What are those sort of key? Everybody's different. I understand that, but are there any key threads that come up quite a lot from working with ex-boarders?
Gosh. Yes, and also there's that kind of infinite difference across people, but generally difficulties dealing with emotions and relationships, I would say. Uh, because those are the things that are not taught at boarding school. They're pushed off to one side. They are the lesser, the lower, the insignificant, um, and um, and they are the things that have been deliberately broken. Um, I think the way that those issues show up for individuals is very different. Sometimes people can come presenting as extremely capable and almost like a bit mystified as to why things seem to be going wrong in relationships. And and other times people can come, as Joe did in the case study, saying, I know that this is a problem to me. I actually feel broken by it, but I don't know how to fix it. And yeah, so that there is, it's an interesting thing that boarding school syndrome as a thing can have these very similar threads running through multiple different life stories, and yet at the same time the way it shows up for one person or the next person can be very, very different. So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I hear you. So the relationships, intimacy.
Mm.
I think in my work, the ones I pick up on a lot is the presence of an inner critic, a very strong inner critic that was
Yeah,
developed to keep the survival personality in check.
yeah,
Often a harsh voice there, a bit of
yeah.
perfectionism, some
Mm.
trying to remember the word, imposter syndrome. That the sword is going to drop at any time. I'm going to get found out at any time here, so I'm just
Mm.
sort of winging it. Comes through quite a lot, and then also just, and this is still a feature very much of school today. We taught grammar school. You went to grammar school. We talked about my girls at grammar school. It's a tough
Mm.
day. Whether people are in an independent day school as well, a very long day, or they're in boarding school, the timetabling is so ridiculously rigorous that
Yeah,
universally with all the exporters I've worked with, there is um, a restlessness, an inability to sit with themselves in quietness, in reflection. There's like, I really should be doing something. There's a lot of should, which I
yeah.
always feel shoulds are given to us without our permission by someone else, typically. So,
Mm.
society, parents, etc., school. I really should be, I really should have a better job. I really should be doing more. I really shouldn't be sat here lazing about. That thing of being timetabling is so hypervigilance and so burnout,
Yeah,
etc. So, yeah, I really, really
absolutely.
notice those. Mhm.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a workaholism that
sure.
goes on.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, it can resonate. I was an alcoholic workaholic, so I just
Yeah,
work, and then at the end of the day, I wondered why I was stressed out, and so booze takes the edge off it,
yeah,
and repeat, and
yeah,
repeat.
yeah,
One thing that was really interesting in the case study that I thought, as we're starting to come to the end now, it was a relatively short relationship. I think you said, was it 14 sessions?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So that's a tight treatment window. It sounds like Joe came with some awareness. He came with some awareness that it wasn't like he came and went, oh, I don't know why my relationship failed. He came saying, oh, something's going on here, help me.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the treatment window and because it was quite a remarkable turnaround for Joe, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, these were issues he'd been struggling with his whole life. And he'd really tried hard to pick things apart in the past and deal with them. He'd had some counselling. He'd spent many years meditating, studying Soto Zen, doing all sorts of, Tai Chi and mind-body practices. And somehow nothing had quite gelled for him up to that point.
Mm.
But he had done, without question, a lot of tilling of the soil, if you like, prior to our work together. So he came with a great deal of awareness of where his issues stemmed from. So we didn't have to do any of that work as, the type of person who comes slightly mystified. Why are my relationships falling apart? I'm, nothing to do with my history or my schooling.
Yeah.
Joe was already very clear that was where the root of his problems lay. But also this internal personal work that he'd done meant that whatever came up in our sessions, he was able to meet that and absorb it, digest it, process it really quickly and effectively in between each of our sessions. So that massively speeded up the work. A lot of things that I would expect to be spending time doing with somebody in session, he was already doing on his own in between sessions. So when he first came to me, I gradually, over the course of 2 or 3 sessions, I was, as I learned more about what he was dealing with, I was thinking, oh, we could be here for months, years. This is really complex stuff. And actually, what became very clear as the work progressed was that he was able to just process things really fast. So 14 sessions ended up being enough for him. It was a surprise to me. There was obviously a lot that he had mentioned at the beginning, which we hadn't really even talked about. I think I mentioned in the case study, to some degree, I was hesitant about presenting this as my work to the world because there's so much that is left unexplored. And that would be quite unusual, I would say. But what was very evident from talking with Joe at the end was that stuff didn't now need to be explored. He had somehow managed to process a lot of that in the background on his own because of all this advance work that he'd done before he ever turned up to our sessions. So yes, I would say in general, I would expect any work with developmental trauma to take a lot longer. And my work with Joe was the exception rather than the rule.
Thank you, Sarah. Beautifully put. And if Joe's listening to this, bless you for your work, for your courage, for your time put in. I know as I've been going through my healing journey, the biggest shifts, some occurred in therapy, some occurred at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Meditating, waking up from a dream, meditate myself back to sleep, and then you can hear the angels sing when this stuff goes. You feel it physically go from your body. It's like a wiping feeling. Everything tingles, and something's moved. And it's like goosebumps, and everyone feels it, different experiences it. But doing that work, so for others out there, doing that work on your own time, Also, you mentioned there, obviously, you've done a lot of meditation, yoga, kind of connecting with the self. So he was rebuilding those connections all the time over the years. Tilling
Yeah.
the soil was your expression. Very
Yeah.
powerful. So, yeah, to anyone listening, if you think it isn't working, it's always working. You just, you it just takes the big payoff, the big shifts come when the subconscious is ready. It'll only give you what you can handle at any one point, and at the right time, at the right place, it'll drop. The pennies will really drop. So thank you for sharing that. It brings a lot of hope, and I know that was part of the reason for this case study, was to bring hope, to bring information to clients who may need to work through this, to
Yeah.
bring awareness and understanding to therapists about working with ex-boarders and about the process. And it's a great case study, and thank you for your part in making this happen, and for your time today. So as we start to wrap up, then any last thoughts perhaps that we didn't touch on from the case study or your work, or perhaps anything to leave people listening with?
Perhaps I can say something about courage, because it's very evident when you read the case study that the degree of courage that Joe brings to his work. But courage has many different aspects, and to some degree, every single person who has come through boarding school has already had to be courageous in that form of courage that is about fortitude, stoicism, putting up with, keeping on going. Anyone who's actually come out the other end of boarding school has learned a lot about that form of courage already. What is needed to undo the damage that may have happened in the process is a different sort of courage. It's an internal process. And that is something that is generally best done with another person. Although courage is an internal thing, a personal thing, there is something profoundly heartening about embarking on a difficult quest with a trusted companion. And I would say to anyone out there who is looking at doing this work, if it feels hard to find the courage to approach it on your own, then find the right person to do it with. And that may be a therapist, it may be a support group, but it doesn't have to be started alone.
Thank you, Sarah. Beautiful words about courage there. And I think the boarding school, and also just wider society, Western society, just this drive for independence is frightening, and it's unhelpful. We are interdependent, and it is about connection that brings the healing. And as you said there, so find someone to help you on your journey, find a group. Great final words for today. But yeah, it's been a really wonderful conversation. Sarah, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to Joe. If you're out there listening, Joe, great job. Yeah, amazing work. And to anyone else listening, there'll be show notes for today that you can have a look at to find the link to the case study we're referencing. It's a great read and just really interesting as well, well written. So let's finish today, but thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Cool. And thank you so much to everyone listening. It's been the Seen and Heard podcast, a conversational series. I'd love to see you on the next one, and please do share this with others if you are moved to. So take care and have a great day. Bye.